Shavua Tov, Robert. Can you hear me?
Shavua Tov.
How are you? Sorry, I know it's a busy night. Slichot are coming.
Indeed, it is, and I'm going to do it right here with the Bayit on Zoom. Otherwise, I have to do it in the middle of the night in Lakewood.
Got it. So let's give it one more minute. I don't know if others can join, but I know I don't want to wait too long because I don't want to miss. Let's give 30 seconds and we'll get started, and others can join us in the middle. Okay. Today is 95, but we're at the bottom of 94B. Let me find it. Four lines from the bottom. Okay. Okay, let's get started. Again, we all have to go to Slichot, and I'm sure others will join along the way. So today's daf in Masechet Bava Batra, which is what we're up to, is I'm gonna blur my background. Okay, is Tzadi Hey 95, and David told me he got up to four lines from the bottom on 94B on Sadi Dalid Amud Bet, four lines from the Talmud, bottom Toshma. So again, just to remember, the case that we're discussing is that our Mishnah yesterday said that if a person sells an object to somebody else, depending on the object, there's allowance for some low quality or some, dirt, let's say, within the grain, right? And if you sell wine, which we'll get to today in great detail, you can sell some lower quality wine with higher quality wine. The question was, whatever those numbers are that you can sell, if you exceed that number, right? Let's say the allowed number is 1 out of 24, we said, which is 4%, right? And let's say you sell it and it's got 6% bad stuff in it. So the guy says to you, I want my money back for that 6%. And you, the seller, go to him and say, what do you mean? I'm allowed to give you 4% bad. So I'll refund you the 2% that's in between, right? It was 6% low quality or poor. And I'm allowed up to 4. So Rafuna said yesterday that that's not how it works. If you sell over the limit, over the 4% limit, let's say, then you have to pay back the entire 6% that was not good. Okay, you have to make it up. So we were trying to prove one way or the other whether Rafuna is correct. So Tashma, the question we have from today is actually from a Breita later on in around a week and a half. We're going to have this, where it talks about a situation where you sell land, right? You sell someone a plot of land and you say it's around an acre, let's say. It turns out that it's a little bit more, a little bit less, let's say. So then there's limits to that as well, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, has to be close. So later on, we're going to say Tashma, the Tani Ravin Bar of Nachman. Let's say you sell and it's the wrong amount. It's too much, right? So you don't have to just give back the extra. Ella machzir lo et kol hariva'in kulan. You have to give back all the extra. Reva'in means a quarter of a kav, but meaning the case there, again, it's a complicated case later, but it's talking about a case where you basically mismeasured it and you gave too much. So the answer that Ravin says later is that you have to give back everything that's extra. So what you see from there, and again, not getting to the case because it's complicated, Alma, what you see from there is that when you have to return because the conditions of the sale were not met, then kula mahader. You don't return the excess over what's allowed. Again, the analogy here, you're allowed 1 out of 24, so 4%, and you sold, 6% of psolet. You don't have to just return the extra. You have to return the entire thing that was not the original sale. So you see a proof from there. And answers the Gemara similar to what we said yesterday. Hachi hashta. How could you say that it's the same thing? Hatam. Now turning to the top of Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. Hatam hein chasir hein yatir amrale. We're going to see later. It's either he said it or it's assumed to say that he said chaser yatir, which means less or more, meaning what we say in English, more or less. Right? He basically said to him, "I'm selling you an acre, more or less. Hein chaser hein yatir. A little bit less, a little bit more." So therefore, he basically said to him, if it's a little bit extra or a little bit less, that's not considered to be different. Mio revia lo chashiv. A quarter of a kav is not considered to be a sizable amount. And therefore, if it's off by a quarter of a kav, it's considered to be the exact same thing. But once you get to be above a quarter of a kav, right? Yotermi revia chashiv. There it is chashiv, and therefore it starts counting, and therefore it's not sold at all. The kivan, the Rashbam doesn't seem to have this gearsum. I'm going to read what's inside. The kivan the chazil the tarufa the tisha kabin Because since ultimately each amount of extra quarter of a kav that you gave, we're talking there later about a large plot of land. So let's say it's, it's 50 acres, let's say, and each one is a quarter of a kav more. Altogether, they can be mitzdaref, it's really 30, to a tisha kabim, to 9 kabim, and havile ara chashifta ba'apinafshi nahadra, and therefore that extra land is its own chashiv thing, and therefore it has to go back. And so basically, the agreement was, I'll sell you a plot of land that's around an acre, around 5 acres, more or less. If it's 5 acres plus a tiny bit, that's considered to be 5 acres. If it's enough extra that it's chashiv as its own field, which is the case later, then basically the entire extra has to go back. But this is not a proof to Rav Huna necessarily, right? Says the Gemara, okay, well, we got a proof from a case that's near and dear to us from Bava Metzia.
Does he have to return the entire field, the entire purchase, or just the extra?
Just so again, we'll see later this case. It depends on what he said and what he wants, but really, presumably just the extra. But he has to return the entire extra, not just the extra above what was allowed.
Well, that's still a small amount, that extra.
Well, I mean,
if it's a quarter of a kav,
no, it's not a quarter kav, just because it's amount of land that you plant that grows a kav. You understand? Or that you can plant that much seed in. Remember, we talked about a bait
right?
core?
So but that's still a quarter of a kav.
Yeah, I don't know.
That he plants
if it's 100 feet, if it's 50 feet, yeah, it's not huge, but it's some amount of land.
So there may not be a great deal of difference between what he wouldn't have to return if it was a little bit extra and what he might have to return if it's a little too much extra. We may be talking about millimeters. I mean, there may be.
I don't think it's. I think we're talking about feet at least. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't. I don't think it's milli. I mean, it'd be very hard in ground to.
Okay, whatever it is. But I mean, it's the point is, I'm saying I'm exaggerating. But the point is that the difference may be really not that significant. We're talking about. I mean, the difference between what is permitted to be included in the sale, what would be beyond what would be permissible, may be a very tiny amount.
Correct. Well, it always has to be that, right? There's a line. Up to the line it is, and above it it's not. So like if it's, like I said, if it's 1/24 in our Mishnah, that's acceptable. If it's 1/23, right, that's too much. So that's obviously a very small difference between 1/24 and 1/23.
1/23
is more, right? So that would be not acceptable. Continues the Gemara. Let's bring a proof. This is our last proof of the 6 that we've been trying to bring, the 4th line of Daf Tzadi Hamid Aleph Tashma. Let's bring from the following halacha, like I said, is very near and dear to us from Bava Metzia, of ona'ah. Now, ona'ah is a similar halacha, but of course different, right? So here you sold someone a container of grain, and it turns out that there's some rocks in it. Ona'ah is where I go to a person and say, I'm willing to buy your car. Let's just pick an example, or your chair. And the question is, what's the market value of that thing, right? So these are things that have a market value. But if you sell it, says the Brighton now, pachot mishtut, if you overcharge or undercharge by less than a sixth, right, then that's the deal. It's worth $100. You paid 110. That's considered to be normal. Nikne mekach, you acquire the thing. Yoter mishtut, if it's more than a sixth, remember we debated whether a sixth was a fifth or not in Bava Metzia. Let's say it's more than a sixth, then batel mekach. If you charge someone $125 for something that's worth 100, then and he finds out within a day, remember we talked about the timeline, then you return the mekach. But if it's exactly a shtut, it's exactly a sixth, then we say kana, the kinyan is made, the thing is sold, umachzir ona. But the seller, again, or it could be the buyer, it could go either way maybe, the seller, let's say, has to return you the extra. You paid exactly a sixth more, let's say a sixth is a fifth, so you paid exactly $20 more, you get back your $20. Now, so why? Why don't you say, look, you're allowed to charge up to a sixth. So you charge, instead of a sixth more, which a sixth is, I don't know, 16% or 18%, you charge 25% more. So return it up to the sixth, right? Meaning you're allowed to charge 120 for a $100 thing. You charge 130, so return the 10. Right? Why do you have to return all $30? Shmami, now what you see here is what Rav Huna said, which is kohecha debai lahaduri. Wherever you have to start paying things back, you start paying back the entire thing. Kula mahader. Again, it's not a good proof. Hachi hashtak. Because hatam, there, it's not like our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah says when you sell grain to someone, or you go to a store and you buy something, you expect that there's an amount that's not going to be high quality, right? Because grain is always mixed in with pebbles. And wine is always mixed in with, things that are not good. There, you went over to buy a thing and you thought you're going to buy it. Hatta make her shaveh b'shaveh. You said, I'm buying equal for equal. I mean, I want to pay market value, right? However, mihu pachot mishtut lo yadia. The word mana is not so clear here either, but I'll read it. But if it's less than a sixth, then it's not a recognizable thing in a sale of 100, meaning it's a small percentage, not so small, but it's a relatively small percentage. Umachil inish, and people forgive it. They understand. Look, we're selling it for equal, but it's hard to know exactly what it's worth, and I have the convenience of going to your store. I'm okay if it's a little bit extra. But shtut, if it's more than if it's a sixth, then people say yadia. They know that this is a wrong price. V'lo machal inish, and they don't forgive. They want to buy it. They recognize they're being gypped. They're being cheated of this. We say cheated nowadays, and they're not mochel. Yeter mishtut, but if it's, and therefore you have to give back the money. If it's more than a shtut, right? So then mekach ta'otu. Then we say the whole sale was nullified because no one in their right mind, he must have had some misunderstanding. And there's mekach ta'ot, ubato mekach, and the whole thing is canceled. And you go back. So it's not that you pay back just the extra. You have to pay back everything. Now he can buy it from you again for the proper price, but the whole sale is canceled. It's again not like our Mishnah. And I misspoke before because I said that was the last proof. There is one more proof. That was the fifth of six.
I don't understand why not say just if it's more than a sixth, just give back the extra then.
So the point is that the understanding in the sale is that I'm coming to you to buy a chair for the market value of the chair. Shaveh b'shaveh. I want to pay for you what it's worth. If you sell it to me for a price that's not what it's worth, or not within even the range of what it's worth, then we say you didn't mean to buy it. It was a mistaken sale. Again, you could always repurchase it. If you change your mind, say, okay, I'm willing to pay you the market value. Nothing's stopping you from doing that. But you have to say that when I went into the sale, I made a mistake. This was misrepresented to me as something else, and I do not agree with the sale. Now, Tashma, let's bring the proof. We're up to the last proof on Daf Tzadi Hey Amid Aleph, not the last words, the last proof, which is around 12 lines from the top, the words Tashma. So again, this is the sixth and final attempt to prove one way or the other what Rav Huna said. And a reminder, what Rav Huna said was that the Mishnah said you're allowed, I'm going to use 4%, which is almost exact, right? You're allowed 1/24th, so around 4% of psolet, of garbage, basically, of pebbles and whatever, other things in the grain that you sell. And we had other examples of other things. Says Rav Huna, if there's more than that percent, let's say you have 6%, not good, then the guy can get refund of 6% of the sale price, or you have to replace the grain. And we said not just up to 4%, you get to the whole thing. So the last proof we're trying to bring to Rav Huna comes to the following case. Tashma, it says, in a braita, hamikabel sadeh mechavero lita. A person goes and says to someone else, look, I'm going to pay you. Remember, a kablan always gets a percentage, right? I'm going to give you my field. Your job is to plant this field with trees, okay? And you get whatever percentage you get of the trees, or I pay you up front, whatever the case might be. Says the Braita, the owner who hired this person to plant accepts that there might be 10 duds, right? Bor is a deficient tree out of every 100. But you plant 100 apple trees, they're not all going to grow. So you accept the acceptable rate of failure is 10%, 10 out of 100 in trees. Continues the Braita, Yoter Mikan, if it's more than this, so 15 out of 100 trees fail, then Migalgalin alav et hakol. Then you have to replace or pay back all of the deficient trees, meaning all 15 in that case. So that proves exactly what Rav Huna said, right? Says Rav Huna, Braid Rav Yeshua, which is obviously a different Rav Huna. Well, that's not a clear proof of our Mishnah, because you could say that when you get to be above a certain number, kol yeter mikan, anything above that number, meaning anything above 10%, kirba lita mitchila dami. Basically, it means it's like planting a new field from start, meaning that when you already have 10 or more trees that are essentially empty or dead in a field, you basically have a whole field that you need to plant, a whole field to start over with. And so when you're planting that number of trees in a field, you might go and hire a person and say to them, I'd like you to plant 15 trees for me in this field, or 10 trees for me in this field. That's considered to be a decent number, basically, to start over and plant a field. And so essentially, in that case, the fact that you missed by more than 10 is a notable thing, and you definitely have to replace everything that you missed. However, Rav Huna's case in our Mishnah it's hard to say that, right? You're giving a pile of grain or something, and there's a small amount in there that's considered to be impure. It's not something you necessarily would go back and make a new purchase for or to replace, and therefore it's not a clear proof from here. Even though all the Breita really suggested what Rav Huna said, it's not 100% the same case to prove what Rav Huna said, that in fact you have to give back everything, not just up to the legal limit. So we don't really prove it from here, but I would say that the bulk of the Braitot that we brought certainly suggest halachas like Rav Huna. Continues the Gemara now. We are halfway down Daf Tzadei Hamid Aleph at the 2 dots.
What's
right?
the bottom line of this last objection then?
So, I mean, again, we just can't prove from there specifically because it's basically a bigger sum. It's essentially the thing. So there, because the field, planting 10 or 15 trees in a field is considered to be a very notable thing. So there you basically have to replace it. Again, it doesn't, this was a proof to Rav Huna. We said it's not necessarily a proof, but I think we pass like Rav Huna, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure we pass like Rav Huna. But let's continue. The next case in the Mishnah, right, was after you get to the next case, the Mishnah talked about how much flour, how many, if you sell, what are te'inim, dates, how many bad te'inim, you could have, right, 10 that have worms in them out of 100. And then the third case in the Mishnah was, or fourth case, martef shel yayin, right? A person sells someone else a martef of wine. The Mishnah said, martef literally means like a cellar, right? Like
basement, cellar, yeah.
Basement thing, right? Martef shel yayin, which must have been a standard size, right? So I say to him, I've got this cellar full of wine. The guy buys the whole shipment. Said the Mishnah, mikabel alav eser kosesot l'me'ah. You accept that there are 10 kosesot l'me'ah. So Rashbam explained in the Mishnah that kosesot means wine that is yayin ra, is what he said, right? Bad wine. And what it really means, though, is wine that that won't age well, right? So it's wine that you basically can drink right now, but if you put it in storage, right? So most wine you put in storage gets better with time, but this wine already, I don't know, maybe it already has the beginning of vinegar. I don't know much about wine, so I don't want to out myself here, but it's, but it's wine that basically you have to drink now, and it's drinkable. It's not ruined. It's not vinegar, but it's not going to age, and you can't store it. And of course, many people buy a barrel, if you buy a cellar full of wine, it's not to drink it tomorrow, right? So it's useful, and the Gemara is going to say in a second, you could take it to a store and sell it today, but you can't store it for a long period of time. That's acceptable up to 10 barrels. Now, 10 out of 100, so 10%. Says the Gemara, I don't understand the Mishnah. Hechidam. What exactly did this guy say, or this person say, when they bought the basement of wine, the cellar of wine? In the Amar Leif, he said to him, look, Martev shel yayin stam, right? Well, Martev shel yayin, I would say. Just the words Martev shel yayin. I want to buy a cellar of wine. He didn't say this cellar of wine. Then, if it's stam, it's a kasha. It's going to be a problem. We're going to see in a second why it's a problem. If he said to him, I want this cellar of wine, then it's also a kasha. We'll see why it's a kasha. He said to him, I want to buy this cellar, but he didn't say of wine, right? Then it's also a kasha. Now, what are we talking about? Let's read the Breita to explain all that. Titania. The Breita explains our Mishnah. Says the Breita around 15 lines from the bottom, first word on the line now, Martev shel yayin ani mocher lecha. If a person goes to somebody else and says, I am selling you a cellar of wine, right? Says the Breita, you have to give him noten lo yayin shekulo yafeh. Has to be perfect. It has to be 100%. It can't be 90%. You say a cellar of wine, it has to be a cellar of wine that's reliable wine, good wine. If you say, Martef zeh shel yayin ani mocher lecha, I'm selling you this cellar of wine, then I accept whatever is in the cellar as long as it's wine. So then, noten lo yayin hanimkar b'chanut. You only have to give him wine that can be sold in a store, which is what we called in our Mishnah bad wine, right? Because it's not bad. I mean, it can't last, but you can sell it in the store. So then it sounds like in the Breita it could be 100% wine that you sell in the store because you said this cellar. So you basically accepted whatever's here, right? And the third case in the Breita is if you say, Martev zeh ani mocher lecha, you don't say the word wine. You just say, I want to buy the contents of this cellar, and you don't specify wine. Then afilu kula chometz. It could all be wine. It could be vinegar, right? Higio. The person gets it because he didn't specify wine. So now none of those are like our Mishnah, right? The first case said it has to be 100% wine. Second case was 100% can be what you sell in the store, which our Mishnah said only 10%. So how do you explain our Mishnah? Answers the Gemara, the case must be.
But the second case, noten lo yayin animkar b'chanut, that is, it should be wine though, right?
Right, but that's what our Mishnah called bad wine. So our Mishnah said 10%. This Braita seems to say 100% can be marginal quality wine. We'll call it that. Okay.
So 10% bad wine or 10% wine or 10% what?
So bad wine and wine are the same thing. There's good wine, bad wine, and vinegar. Those are the three categories.
So if he says noten lo yain and imkar b'chanut,
that's bad wine. Yain and imkar is bad wine.
Right, but does that mean 10% of what's in that?
That sounds like 100%. It could be all bad wine because you just said I remember when you say the word zeh, you basically accept whatever's there, right? So if you say this seller of wine, so it has to be wine, but it could be even poor quality wine, which is what we call yain imkar b'chanut, right? And again, I say poor quality. I don't know what poor quality means, can be relative, but it just means it's not something you can store, right? You can't keep it for a long time. So how do you explain our Mishnah? Answers the Gemara now, La'olam. The way you have to explain our Mishnah is the Amar Le is where the person said in the Mishnah said, Martef shel yayin stam, right? And he said to him, I'm selling you a martef of wine. Now the Braita said, if you say martef shel yayin, if you give 100%. So we have to add words to the Braita. We have to Tani Bereisha the Braita. You have to add words to the beginning of the Braita where he said that umikabel alav eser kosasot l'me'ah. That in fact the Braita really is missing words, and the Braita meant to say, if I sell you wine, it has to be 100% wine minus 10, right? Which again the Braita obviously didn't say, but we're adding that to the Braita. Okay, that's how we have to explain the Braita. Is that true? Ubistami mikabel. Is it true that if I go to someone and say I'm selling you wine, that he accepts 10% lower quality wine? Well, Tani Rabbi Chia, remember there's a Braita for Rabbi Chia. Remember Rabbi Chia was the one who checked all the Braitot, and so if Rabbi Chia quoted a Braita, it was high quality, and he wrote the Tosefta, right? Hamocher chavit yain lechavero. If you sell a barrel of wine to your friend, notein lo yain shekulo yafeh. It has to be wine that's perfect, right? And then you understand how could a wine not either it's a barrel it's perfect or not perfect, right? How do you don't have different kinds of wine in a barrel? So some understand that it means that a barrel of wine is, I don't know what the equivalent is in our numbers, but a barrel might be 20 bottles, right? Or whatever it is, maybe 50 bottles, I don't know. So you basically are buying a barrel's worth of wine, right? Then you have to basically give yain shekula yafeh. What about the 10%? Answered the Gemara, that's different. Shani chavit, at least according to the way I just explained it, a barrel is different because you're basically selling one barrel's worth of wine. So what you're saying to the person is, I want it all to be identical. Dekula chad chamro. It's all wine from basically one vintage, one growing. It's different, and therefore you have to have 100% good wine. The problem is, what if you sell a cellar? A cellar is known to be different kinds of wine, right? They're not all one harvest necessarily, or one type of wine, or one filling. So that's the question. If you say one barrel, you mean one good barrel. But if you say a cellar, we still don't know exactly what you mean. And what we explained currently, we're going to change this. We're going to have an argument about this in a second. But we explained currently is that our Mishnah said stam mocher martef shel yayin. I'm buying from you a cellar of wine. Then you get 90% good long-term wine and up to 10% short-term wine. So that's how we explain our Mishnah. Ask the Gemara, is that true? But there's another Braita. And this Braita seems to throw a little cold water on the whole discussion. Hatani, we're going to call this the Braita of Rav Zvid, because he's the one who quotes it. Tani Rav Zvid. Rav Zvid, Debei Rab Oshaya, said the following Braita. He taught this Braita. It says now, 3 lines on the bottom. Martev shel yayin ani mocher lecha. If a person goes to somebody else and says, I am selling you this seller of wine, right? Notein lo yayin shekulo yafeh. You have to give a perfect barrel, a cellar of wine. It has to all be good, kulo yafeh, right? However, and we'll see. Well, why can't you just add in the words we added to the first Braita, which is except for 10%? But let's keep reading. It continues the Braita. Martef zeh shel yayin ani mocher lecha. If I'm selling you this cellar of wine, then notein lo yayin shekulo yafeh. You again, which sounds different than the first Braita, have to give wine that is perfectly good, except for 10%. Umikabel alav eser kosasot, l'me'ah. You have to accept 10 lower quality, right, wine for 100, so 10%, and can turn the page to daf tzadihei on mebet. V'zehu, this is the end of the Braita, I guess. Zehu otzer, sorry, not the Braita. This is Rav Zvid speaking. The Zehu otzer sheshanu chachamim mishnatenu. This Braita, which said that if you sell an otzer, right, of wine. You get to hold back. Basically, it's okay to sell 10% that are kosesot. That's what this Braita was referring to. This Braita is referring to our Mishnah, which is the case where you said Martef zeh shel yayin. Okay? Ela matnitin nami damrei zeh. And therefore, you have to understand, according to Rav Zvid, that our Mishnah is where you added the word zeh, which meaning you said specifically zeh. And therefore, because you said the word zeh, you have to give good stuff, but 10% can be bad. Ask the Gemara, but there's a problem now with the two Braita. Right? Because if you recall, the Braita Nomen Aleph said that if you say this seller, it could be 100% bad wine. And this Braita now says if you say zeh, it can only be 10% bad wine. So ask the Gemara, kasha zeh azeh. So now we have a problem from one Braita that says with zeh, you give 10% bad, 90% good. And one Braita which says zeh, it could be 100% bad because as long as it's wine, it fills the criteria. Says the Gemara, you're right, but there's another criteria because it depends on what you say. Lokashia, it's not a problem. The Braita contradicting each other because, where am I? Lokashia, third line, had amrle lemikpeh. If the person said to him, I'm buying it from you lemikpeh, which means for cooking, meaning I'm using this wine in order, maybe cooking is the wrong word, I'm using this wine for food preparation, right? I'm putting the wine in my food, making my roast with it, I guess. Right? And then you need to have good quality wine because the food's not going to taste good if you don't use good wine. So it has to be yayin, or the Rashbam's words are l'tzorch lahatim machal. It's there to improve the taste of the food, right? And that has to be yayin tov, which I don't think people generally do, right? We put lower quality wine. So anyways, that's what the Rashbam wrote, right? So it has to be better wine. It has to last for longer. Maybe it took him long to cook. I don't know. So therefore, if you say specifically, I'm buying this cellar of wine for you to cook, which of course it must be a big meal. You need a whole cellar of wine, but I'm buying this cellar of wine from you to cook, then it has to be perfect quality, right? So that's right. Then most of it has to be perfect quality. Had amrle the mikpeh. That's where you said I'm doing it for cooking, so I need higher quality. Had amrle the mikpeh, where you didn't say that I was doing it for that purpose. So the Rav Zvid, the Braita Rav Zvid, which says that it has to be 90% good, Damrle the mikpeh. He said, I want to buy this cellar of wine, Martev Zeh, but I want to do it mikpeh. So then it has to be 90% good. But Braita is where you didn't say that. You just said, I want to buy this cellar of wine, Damrle the mikpeh. And then it could be 100% wine that you have to drink right away. Maybe you're just having a huge party tonight. And you just need 100 barrels of wine, right? Big party. But you don't necessarily need it to last. Hilkach. Now says the Gemara, let's lay it all out for you. It's a very straightforward Gemara, right? He says the Gemara, we're going to lay out all the cases for you. You got it? Hilkach.
So when do we have the case where it's 100% good wine?
Well, that's if you say yayin zeh. You say, don't say zeh, right? So then you say, I'm going to buy wine from you. Then we said it has to be 100% good wine. Because I'm just saying I'm buying wine. I'm buying a cellar's worth of wine. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily this cellar. Let's say a cellar is 50 barrels. I'm saying I want 50 barrels of wine from you. That we assume to mean 50 good barrels of wine. It's only if you say this cellar, which means whatever is in the cellar, there it depends. If the cellar has 10% bad wine and you say the mikpeh, that's okay, but more it's not. If you don't say I want it for cooking, then whatever's in the cellar, as long as it's wine, is okay. It could be 100%. Let's read in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to lay it all out. Fifth line from the top. Hilkach. Here's the way it comes out. If you say Martef shel yayin, I want to buy a cellar of wine, and now we add this here, and I say I want it to be wine that I can use to store for cooking, right? Then notin lo yayin shekulo tov. You have to give wine that's perfectly good, 100%. If you say Martef zeh shel yayin, if you say I want this cellar, not a cellar, but this cellar, then it depends. If you say lemikpeh, and I want it for cooking, which means I need some wine that's good quality, then it has to be 90% minimum good quality. Notin lo yain shekulo yafeh, umekabel alav eser kosesot l'me'ah. You accept 10 that are not good quality out of the 100. But if you say martef zeh shel yayin, I want this cellar, and you don't say I need it for cooking, v'lo amar le lemikpeh, then it has to be wine, but it could be even 100% wine that needs to be sold in the store right away. Notin lo yain hanimkar bechanut right away. What about the fourth case though? Ibaylu, the third to last narrow line. What if you say martef shel yain, I'm selling you a cellar of wine, but you don't speak out and say I want it for cooking? So then what do you mean? Velo amar le mikpeh. What happens in that fourth case where I say I want to buy a seller of wine, not this seller, but a seller, but you don't say specifically that I want to use it for long term. So what's the halacha there? So pliga b'ravacha v'ravina. Last narrow line, machloket ravacha and ravina. Chad Amar, one says mikabel, that the person is willing to accept 10% that's not good. Because since he didn't specifically say, I want to use the wine for cooking, we assume some of the wine you want to drink in the next few days. And so 10%. Chad Amar lo mikabel. The other one says, no, if he said a seller of wine, it's got to be perfect wine. Manda Amar mikabel, the first wide line, the one who says that, in fact, the buyer would accept 10% not good wine, they are midayek from Rav Zvid, right? Dayek mida Rav Zvid. Diktani, because in the Breita of Rav Zvid, no, it's not Rav Zvid, but his Breita, we quoted now, Martef shel yain ani mocher lach. I said that was the first part of Rav Zvid's Breita, on Amud Aleph. I'm selling you a cellar of wine, and you don't say this seller, you don't say what it's for. The Breita said, notein lo yain shekulo yafeh, right? And Rav Zvid explained, as we said on Amud Bet above, that only was true, not only, but that was true, that it's when he said to him, I want to use it for cooking, right? Now, taima d'amrei mikbah. The implication I'm going to have from that is that it's only because I said I want it for cooking. Now, remember, Zvid said, not this part of the Breita, Zvid said the other part of the Breita, where he said, Martef zeh shel yayin, has to be talking about a case where you said I want it for cooking. So we assume that should apply to the entire Breita. So the first part of the Breita also is where you wanted it for cooking, and then we're going to make the diuk the opposite. That's only because you said I want it for cooking that you have to give 100% good. Time with Amalei the mikbah. Hello, Amalei the mikbah. If you don't say specifically that I want it for long-term use, then mikabel, then you accept a 10% not good wine in that case. Now the other Amora, Mandam lo mikabel, the other Amora who says that you don't accept any bad wine when you say yayin a martef of yayin stam, that's B'daik mi Breita. He's B'daik from the first Breita. The first Breita said, Martef shel yayin ani mocher lach, notein lo yayin shekulo yafeh. Right there, we said you have to give yain shekulo yafeh, and that Breita we said ukimna d'lo amalei the mikbeh. That Breita was talking about where you didn't say I want to use it for cooking, because if you recall, the Breita continued and said if you said martef zeh shel yain, this seller, then you could give him 100% not good quality, right? So it must be a case where you didn't say I want it for long term. So if you didn't say I want it for long term, the ratio of the Breita says that as long as you say martef shel yain, you give the good things. So therefore, it's not a that's therefore, if you don't say anything, you still have to get 100% good wine. Ask the Gemara, what does each one do with the other one's Breita? Well, if you're looking at Rav Zvid, Kasha Breita, so the first Breita is a Kasha, he would say, well, I'm going to add words to that Breita, like we already have done that. The Breita is missing some context. The Breita should say, when is it true that you get, if you say, I want a seller of wine, you get 100% good wine, that's only to Amalei the mikbah. It's only if you said, I want to use it for long-term storage, for good cooking. Hello, Amalei the mikbah, mikabel. And therefore, says that Amora, if you didn't say, I want wine that's good, that's going to last me for a long time, you accept mikabel 10% that's not so good, right? Umartev shel yayin. However, if you say to the person, this is the continuation of the Breita, if you say, I want this martef of wine, and you don't say anything, right? So now you have to differentiate. The first part of the Breita is where you said, I want it for long term. The second part is where you didn't want it for long term. So it's a little challenging because you're splitting it up. That's what you got to do. If you say, I want to buy this cellar of wine, and you don't specify, and I want to use it for long term for cooking, then notein lo yain hanimkar bechanut. Then you can give him wine that's immediately sellable in the store, even if it won't last for long. And finally, last part of this, and it's a little confusing. Well, the man Daik mi Breita, the one who was Midaik from the first Breita, right? Kasha de Rav Zvid, he has a problem with Rav Zvid because Rav Zvid said very clearly, the Ukimna, that the Breita is the Amalei the Mikbah, that it's only where you said specifically, I want it for long-term use, but Halo Amalei Mikbah Mikabel, it implies from Rav Zvid's Breita that if you didn't say, I want this wine cellar in order to use wine for long-term use for cooking, you are mikabel a 10% short-term wine. Says that Amora Huadin the afagav de lo amar mikba lo mikabel. It could very well be that although Rav Zvid said that the Braita is referring to a case where a person walked over to someone and said, I want to buy your wine cellar in order to use the wine for cooking, you get 100%. It could very well be that even if he had not said that, even if he didn't say, because I want to use the wine for long-term use for cooking, he would not want any part that's bad. The reason we said it specifically talking about a case where he said I want it for cooking is because the second part of the Braita needed that. You had a problem from the second part of the Braita where you said I want this wine cellar, and there it had to be a case of mikvah, right? Because if you say I want this wine cellar, this cellar full of wine, then you can sell them 100% not good wine unless you specifically say, I want it for cooking. And so therefore, we basically cannot prove one way or the other from the Braitot exactly what the halacha would be in the case where you say, I would like to buy a wine cellar from you, a cellar full of wine. Because it may be that a cellar full of wine means I accept 10% that's not so good that I can drink right away, or it may mean that I want 100% that's good for long-term storage.
Rav Zid was able to change the bright to the he says Chasori Mechzer, right? So he's able to change it to satisfy him. But what about the second man, the Omer, right? That what we just quoted now. I'm a little confused. How isn't he able to satisfy himself?
So you can't change that, right? So changing the Braita won't help. But the point is that according to the second Braita, the Braita specifically said of a case where a person went to someone else and said, I'd like to buy you a cellar of wine from you for the purposes of cooking, right? Then you have to give 100% good wine. So one would assume that if that's the case of the Braita, you can understand that if you didn't add those words for cooking, then it doesn't need to be 100% good wine. And what this Amor is saying is that no. The reason that you have to say the words for cooking is not because you need to say that. You really didn't need to say it. The reason that Rizvid said that was the case in the Braita is because the second part of the Braita needed those words. So he's not basically taking out words. He's saying the words are extraneous, right? Because they're only there because they need it for the second part. So it's almost the opposite of Chasur and Mechasur. He's basically erasing words in the Braita. He's taking out those words from the Resha, which say, I need it for mikbeh. And he's saying those are not necessary words. They're only there for the later part.
And he wouldn't be makabel then.
And he would not be makabel any bad part, correct. Let's finish because we said we'd finish by 9. We're almost there. Amar Yehuda, where am I? Amar Yehuda, 5 lines from the bottom. Yayin and imkar bechanut. Remember that when you drink wine, we all know the halacha. You make a special bracha, right? Unlike every other liquid, when you say shakol, on wine you say berei pri hagafen. And the reason you do that is because wine is something very respectable. The problem, of course, is that we've just been talking about wine that you buy in the store, which is junk wine, right? The real respectable wine is the stuff you can store. So says Rav Yehuda, even if you buy wine in the store, you should still say berei pri hagafen, because, even though it's not high quality wine, it's still something good. Okay. Now, again, obviously they had a little different use of wine than we do, right? So maybe it was stored poorly. But anyways, and Rav Chisda says, what are you talking about? Wine that's akrim usually means like it's karim, it has a layer on it, right? It's congealed a little bit. Wine that's sort of, drying out. Lamali, why would we call that wine? Meaning, it's not even wine. Just say shakon, if you're buying it in the store. Mate asks, what about the fine Braita? The Braita says takes us way back to brachot. It says, let's say you've got pat she'ipsha. You've got bread that's getting moldy. So bread also, right? You don't make the regular bracha on bread, which is brei minei mizonot. You say hamotzi lechem min haaretz. But let's say it's getting moldy. Is it still bread? It's edible, obviously, but it's not very high quality. Or yayin she'ikrim. Or if you have wine that is getting a film on it, so it's getting not moldy, but getting old. Or tavshil she'ibrat zurato. Or you got a dish that is, ibrat zurato literally means it lost its shape, but it means, it's turning moldy, right? So in all those cases, says the Braita, omer shakon niya b'dvaro. So you see very clearly that once you have wine that's going bad, you don't make berei pri hagafen on it anymore. You make shahakol. Says Ravid, it's true, but that's not referring to the wine you buy in the store. That's referring to a case where you've got Mudar Rav Yehuda, the portsima, the mizdabena karnata. That's the portsima, which you buy on the street corner. What's portsima? It's a portsima we learned about in the brachot, if you recall. It's basically where they didn't even have, it wasn't really wine. They would take the seeds that were left over after the wine was after the grapes were stepped on, and they would soak it with water, which would sort of get some of the taste and some of the oxidation, I guess, out of the seeds. And they called it wine, but it was really, really not wine. It was a grape product This is what we would call it nowadays, right? But it was not wine, and therefore that for sure you don't make Brei Agafen. But this low quality stuff that you buy in the store, right? There, Rav Yehuda says you do say Brei Agafen. Obviously, Rav Chisda disagrees, and we're going to leave it at that. Tomorrow, we are going to get to another case about what's considered to be high quality wine and what's considered low quality wine, and where the line goes between wine and regular liquid, and when you can make a bracha. Now, I don't know what time we're learning tomorrow. So I'm in Bermuda, actually, and I'm flying back tomorrow. So I'm unable to teach in the morning. God willing, will arrive back around 5 o'clock. So sometime in the evening works for me. Mincha, I think, is like 6:15 or 6:20-ish. 6:20. So it's got to be after that. So any votes or anyone available?
I would say later is better because
But how late? You're a very night owl, right?
no, well, I get up early too, but I'm pretty busy most days.
Okay. Well, anyone else? Miriam?
I would say
I'm not making any promises. I'll be in California, but I don't know what my schedule is gonna be, so you
Okay.
tell
so
me
no-
what time it is. If I can join, I'll be more than happy to do that. But if not, I don't want to impede on other people's like schedules. So
Okay.
I
So,
mean, if you say 9 o'clock, hopefully I can.
but so before 9's hard for you, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, we're gonna say
I don't
9
know.
o'clock, and I hope it's just not me alone. But if it is, well, I'll record it.
oh my gosh.
I'll have to repeat what Miriam said. If I cannot make it, I'll catch the recording, but I
Okay,
won't know.
I'll
till
understand.
tomorrow.
So it might be me, it might not. But 9 p.m. tomorrow. Shavua Tov. If I don't see you all,
Shavua Tov.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
We'll look to learning a lot in the new year.
Amen.
Take
Are
care.
you doing next Motzaei Shabbat?
I think so, but we have to figure out the time because it won't be 45 minutes. Because I'm going to be in Manhattan, I'll have to get home, so it'll probably take more than that. So maybe an hour. We'll see. Let's talk when we get close. I know what works. We can talk about it now. I can do next Motzaei Shabbat, but I can't do it. It'll take me some time to get home. So maybe an hour and 15 minutes afterwards.
Yeah, so I won't be able to do it.
Because you're going to be in California, right?
I won't be able to do. I won't be able to do it either. We'll be away for Rosh Hashanah, and we'll be traveling home then.
Got it. Okay.
So I do it from the car.
Okay. Well, I'll put the time on if you can do it.
I mean, I can do it anytime at Motzaei Shabbat, 8, 9 o'clock, 10, whatever you
Okay,
like,
so-
10 o'clock.
No. Around an hour, maybe an hour, 15 minutes after Rosh Hashanah, we'll do it. I'll put the time in the chat.
So you could do it. So that would be 7:30, 8:30. That would
Like
be about, it
8:45.
would be about 9 o'clock.
Okay. Well, I'll
Because
look at- I don't know the times.
7:30, it's over about 7:15 or 7:30, so about an hour and a half, it's 8:45. So at
Okay,
9
that's-
o'clock would be okay then too.
Okay, we're gonna aim for 8:45, but let me put in the chat the final time. Okay, everyone. Good night.
Thank you,
See some
Eli.
of you tomorrow at
Shavua
9. Shavua Tov.
Please enter your password, then press pound. You have 1 new voice message and 1 saved message. New message.